To have a good harvest, one must plant good seeds and must also use the right kind of fertilizer. The carrots have grown large and firm. How good they will taste.
Well, welcome back to the Backyard Gardens podcast, everybody. We hope you're having an absolutely amazing gardening season. It is coming to an end shortly, not right away. Everybody relax, but shortly. But you ever seen those numbers on the seed packs that tell you the day to harvest? Well, we got to talk about that today. And this comes from a question. So right off the bat, before we get started, Batavia, what is your opinion on that date?
It's never going to be exactly accurate unless you were in my backyard garden 2 seasons ago when I sowed radishes and it told me 30 days from seed to harvest, and it was exactly that. That's the only time in my history.
There you go. So that's it, everybody. I hope everybody has a fantastic day, and we will. No, I'm joking. Yeah, it's we've got a list to go by, and we'll get into all aspects of it, but it's important to kind of use it as a guide, I think, though. You know what I mean? I don't think we should you take it as gospel, but I think it should definitely be a guide.
Yeah, I think that I'm checking our list again. I definitely err on the side of you may need more days, the likelihood of you needing less days, like that all depends. It all depends on everything we're going to talk about today.
Yeah. So this comes, this is actually a question of the day that we thought we really wanted to talk about it because this falls in line with zones for us. Mm-hmm. We hate it. There you go. But there's some validity to it and there's some caveats to it too. But this comes from Sarah, who she emailed it to us at bygquestion@gmail.com. So you can be just like Sarah and send us a question, and says, "Hi, Ben in Batavia.
Hey, Sarah.
Hi, Sarah. I hope email finds you well. I've been listening since relocating from Washington State to Indiana a couple years ago. I've done greenhouse gardening, raised beds, and now I have a patio garden and community garden plot and learn new things every year and love developing my skills. I have a question. Would you please help clarify how the plant cycle works in regards to timing when planting seeds and then when to harvest? I'm specifically confused about whether germination time is part of the overall number of days of harvest. I've been trying to plan approximate planting and harvest times to help with succession planting and maximizing my harvest, but the approximate dates make me confused and nervous. Perhaps could you explain how it works using a scenario? I sure appreciate all you do. Give a high five to Leonard for me too." There you go, Leonard. Cheers.
So, importantly, hey, garden neighbor. So, also note, if you are in one of the bordering states to Illinois, if you are in Illinois, you are a garden neighbor. But also, if you're in a bordering state, I don't go 2 states over, but anything that's touching the tip of Illinois, you're in my camp.
Yeah, I have no garden neighbors, so there you go. We're 2 different people, everybody. What can I say? But yeah, so there's a lot cooking here, and it's a good question because it does get confusing, and it's something that we need to consider when we are planning our gardens and planting our gardens in the future. So, I remember when I first started gardening, I would look at those numbers, and I would also look at the little maps on the back of some of the packets about when to plant. Mm-hmm. And I would run with it, and I would go and take it to my grave that was the way it was supposed to work. And I've learned that, again, it's a good guide. It's not necessary. And your opinion, Batavia, germination time included in days to harvest?
No.
Okay. My opinion is yes. Yeah.
So in the history of Backyard Gardens podcast, I don't know if I've ever given a 1-word answer.
I don't think you have.
Wouldn't it be the time that it conflicts with your one-word answer.
We should stick everything to one-word answers and see how short we can cut the show. But there's a couple reasons why, and I think we'll get into it. But what affects germination times? That's an important thing to get right off the bat.
Yeah, temperature as well as light.
And water.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah. Well, you know, we kind of say like, yeah,
for
but
sure.
how many?
No, obviously, so let's take a step back. Soil medium. Water. Temperature. So it almost, you reverse the question, what's a requirement? What are the requirements for germination? Right? Yes, the answer will be the same, but the question is definitely different. So you're absolutely right. You know, a seed that has no moisture isn't just going to pop up, you know. Well,
so it's important that we understand right off the bat that seed has moisture, enough moisture built into it to get it the very first root to come out. But the moisture that we add is to soften the shell of that seed so that it can then start to grow, basically pop out. So you're exactly right. Temperature, big deal. Too hot, too cold. The moisture, the reason why I don't know if I gasped, but I made some kind of noise or comment when you said that was, I mean, how many times have you started a seed and then like forgot to water it or something and kind of set it back a little bit? You know what I mean? And then you go back and you give it water and then it's like, boom, it just starts to really grow. So that's definitely one. And soil medium, I kind of took for granted, but I think you're exactly right. Soil medium is a big deal. I mean, if you're using like a real, like, I know at first I would use like just regular potting soil, and it rarely worked well for me. When I switched to a finer soil, it worked better because the roots can push through the ground. They can hold moisture better, and it's softer for them. So you definitely get that as well. So all those things taken into account make a big difference.
Now since we're here, young Ben, why am I concerned about the soil medium when I'm starting seeds and seed cells or seed blocks? And I can scatter seeds outside in my yard where there's all kinds of soil mixed up in there and seeds are germinating. Like, what's the difference there?
Well, so first of all, I don't like the fact that I'm taking a test right now, but that's okay. I've thought about this before because the thought process in my head at one point was like, well, I'll just go throw seeds out there and let them grow. And that doesn't really work as good as you think. When I target a soil container, some kind of cell or block or something like that, and I put 3 seeds in, generally I get 3 seeds that germinate. If I go out there into the ground, there's a lot that can happen. It can get too hot and dry out the soil. It can be, all the previous things we said, but the germination rate, in my experience, has not been as good as if I've done something in a cell. I think it appears that way because usually you throw out a lot of seeds and you're just like, whatever. If you were just to scatter seeds, would you be as precise as you are putting in seed cells, or would you just kind of dump a pack of seeds out there?
In this scenario, I'm just scattering them. I'm just dumping them. I'd never do that, but yeah, I think that. So I look at it and say we're trying to come up with this kind of fine, perfect soil medium when we're starting seeds. And let's say seed trays. I know people use seed blocks and things and other containers to start seeds. But then I look and say this raised bed that I have, it's like really dense soil and seeds are germinating, right? And the reality is that the conditions in nature, let's call nature the raised bed for a moment, are made to help that seed along with the germination and growth, where it's different when it comes to you're bringing it indoors. You don't have ants moving things around. You don't have, that the level of oxygen that's coming through the soil and that living soil that's in your raised bed. It's a different scenario. I do believe you're right. It feels like I have like 20 volunteer lettuce plants that seeds just blew around, right?
Yeah.
You know, but didn't I have like 1,000 seeds that had an opportunity to blow around, and I only have 20, you know? So, so again, just a little bit of devil's advocate there.
Yeah, but I mean, I think too, when we start them in seed cells, we're very precise in how much soil goes on top, how much water it gets. I think overall they're just nursed better. But I think it's a valid question because it seems, and I mean, I do a lot of direct sowing too, but I tend to direct sow more liberally with my seeds. So I'll put 3, 4, 5 seeds in a hole when I direct sow them versus in a pot. And I think that's one of the things that we really got to think about too as we move forward in this is like, how are we as a gardener, because it's one of those subjects where we can't just openly talk about like all gardeners do this, because everybody does it. Every single person listening to this does it differently. And that's really important. But I started a bunch of seeds in summertime this year in a drought, and I actually did fairly well with them, but I nursed the crap out of them. I watered them every day. I mulched them so that they could stay, moist longer. And I finally did get germination. It would be interesting if you did that and you did a side by side. I don't think I've ever done that, but not overly concerned about it, but it is something that I think is very interesting. That it just seems to work better when I do it in cells, which is why I tend to do more of those in cells. Plus, you're kind of getting a jump start on the season. We've said that a million times on this show, so that's always part of it. But you said temperature. Temperature is a really, really big one, and that can even make a seed not germinate at all. Not just germinate slowly, but not germinate, or make it germinate faster. So that's applying heat or avoiding heat for your seeds.
Well, temperature also kind of ties into that soil and that water as well, right? So temperature is going to impact how that soil medium dries out too. But I think generally, we talked about more recently, we were looking at a seed germination chart. I think we were talking about carrots as an example. And the ideal temperature that it germinates in, and then when it's too hot for that particular seed to germinate.
Right. Like spinach is famous for not germinating when it's hot. So, thinking about that. But then on the flip side, like in the winter time and you're starting seeds in your house, if your house is colder, you can really, like pepper seeds are famous for taking a long time to germinate, which is where adding heat mats and stuff like that will make a difference. But a common thought is, well, I need to always add a heat mat. And that's just not true. Some of these seeds are very capable, and if not loving, germinating when it's cooler. So, it's kind of, and the way I look at that is like, when does that plant typically grow? If it typically grows in the summer, add heat. If it typically grows in the fall and the spring, don't add heat, up to an extent. I mean, you can't start it in like 33 degree soil and be like, oh, it never germinated. Of course not. Because what's going to happen? Do you know? I know you know. If I say it, you're going to be like, oh, yeah, of course.
I don't know.
The seed's going to rot.
Yeah.
If it stays too moist. See? But it's kind of one of those things that you have to, we have to understand as we move forward into this, is like the temperature has a big deal to do with it, because it also affects the water in the soil, the retention in the soil. So if it's too hot, it evaporates. If it's too cold, it stays longer. So you have to keep all that in mind.
Something that I don't think we talk about often enough. There's the idea of quantity as well. So if I was starting just 6 plants, that's all I'm going to grow is 6 plants. The things that I do would likely be a lot more simplistic when it comes to starting them versus 60.
Yeah.
Versus 600 across a season. right? So there is a level of hedging your bets, a level of protecting yourself from the gardener that you are. So you look at, there's a timeline that we're working on, right? That's me snapping my fingers, as into the motion says we should be moving faster. There's a timeline we're working on. And the reason why Sarah's asking this is because this time matters. And this is the reason why it links to both fall and spring, I believe, probably most importantly.
Yeah.
It's definitely relevant for summer, of course. But when we're on a timeline that we need to be more precise with, I think in our fall and our spring plantings, this time that we're talking about to germinate a seed and steps that we can take to actually improve it, I think all of that's really, really relevant. And if you think about kind of the timing of this, a lot of us are doing things for fall plantings now, and we're doing things in various ways. Seeding indoors, direct sowing, all of that ties into the timing of this, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's a piece to the puzzle to keep in mind as you start to go through this. And it's pretty fortunate across the board. Germination time tends to be 7 to 10 days. Generally speaking, there's clearly some that are more, and there's clearly some that could be less. But what I've noticed is if I apply more heat, sometimes, and again, adding a heat mat on your seed shelf, direct sowing outside when it's warmer, you can get faster germination. I had carrots last year that germinated in 3 days versus 20 days. Mm-hmm. And that was, it was hot when I put them out there, but I think I was just able to cool that soil down enough that they popped early. It was shocking. And I do it now. I just started a couple trays of seeds and I left them outside because they'll germinate faster. And then once they germinate, I'll bring them in and put them under my lights. So I can kind of speed up that process a little bit and not even worry about having the heat mats and stuff like that this time of year. So, and that brings us to the days to harvest on the seed packet. And so, oh man, I really do hate those numbers. But again, if you didn't have those numbers, where would you be when you go to plant something? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, so I'm looking at our notes here. I know you thinking that, is she not paying attention? I hear
you shaking seed packets constantly.
Yeah.
I know what you're doing.
Almost always absolutely in tune with my fellow buddy and pal and friend, young Ben. But I brought these plastic bag of seeds, and specifically for cabbage. I was commenting with another gardener, and she said something like, I plan on putting out a short season cabbage. And I said, thanks for the reminder. I've just generally said I'm going to plant cabbage, and I had my cabbage seeds, but I hadn't selected a particular variety. So I was going through the seeds that I have and marking down the days to harvest, right? And so cabbage is something that I already knew going in. There's some that actually come in the gate saying it's going to take 100 days.
Yeah.
It's going to take 120 days, right? And I don't have that time when it comes to where I am in the season now. And there's some that take a shorter period of time per the package or per, what's known about this particular variety. I think I'd probably, based on what I know about myself, err on the side of the longest. And I'd either use my experience with growing that vegetable, and this is how long it took, and that'd be my gauge, or I'd seek out someone else if there's no, back to your question, if there was no package information. How long did it take? And I probably would stumble along because, I'd ask Sarah, she's in Indiana, similar weather, right? And if she tells me it's took 90 days, I'd use that as my gauge until I found out otherwise within my own garden.
Yeah.
Confirmed it or found out otherwise.
The problem I have is when you start to get you use cabbage, which is a great example, 120 days, 100 days. I've seen them for 70 days. Mm-hmm. And I've never experienced a 70-day harvest off of a cabbage, ever. But there's something to be said about that, which we'll get into that here in a second. I want to think about, and I don't know the answer to this, but across the board, if they have seed to harvest days, do you think that it seemed that it's a standardized number across the board? You know, generally speaking,
for
not
a particular variety of that vegetable, yes.
Right.
Yes.
So how do they come up with that number?
I imagine some university, when they did their testing of the seed before it ever went to market, they tracked a number of things, including how long did it take from the point of when they seeded it to the point of when it germinated to the point of when it was harvested, and also considered the weather conditions that they'd recommend growing that particular vegetable in.
So I'm almost certain, but this is just an assumption, but it's a heavy assumption, is that it's a standardized process, meaning they're going to start that seed at the perfect temperature and they're going to give it the best environment possible. Mm-hmm. It's the same thing as, I mean, you know, have you ever bought a piece of electronics has a battery and they're like, you're going to get 5 hours of runtime on it, but you only get like 3, and you're like, well, what the heck? And it's like, well, you know, if you like drones applies to them directly, is you'll get 33 minutes of flight time out of it. Well, if you ever watch them when they test it, it's in a room with no wind, tethered. They don't have to do anything. The drone doesn't have to do anything. It just hovers and the battery runs, right? And so that's where that number comes from. It's same with cameras and stuff like that. It's the room is cooled. It's not being on, off, switched around, and, you know, all these different things. Same with phones. They don't have a bunch of extra apps running on them and stuff like that. So it's perfect conditions. And I imagine that's what's going on here. And that's why I say that they do factor in the germination time, because it is a standardized process at some point, and they factored in, they put the seed in the ground, they give it that optimum temperature. Remember what I told you about the carrots, where it germinated in just a few days, and then it came up. So then we get into the wording, and it's like up to. And so just by doing that, now you've padded yourself in, because they know that we're not going to all start our seeds at 53.3 degrees. You know, that's not possible, you know, so we're not all giving them perfect conditions. And I think it's really hard to give them perfect conditions too. I almost don't think it's possible.
Yeah, I have a Napa-like cabbage here that one website has 60 to 75 days. Another seller has 60, approximately is how it's written, 60 days. And so days to germinate for the one that has approximately 60 days is 7 to 10. So you're telling me that, let's say on the long end, it's 10 days to germinate. Within 50 days, I have a full head of cabbage.
That's what they say.
We're going to find out.
Yeah. I mean, and see, that's the thing. Now, you have to remember, though, it's not just the germination time they're giving it the optimum stuff. It's, you know, all the way across. It's even during growing. So they're probably fertilizing heavy. They're probably giving it the exact amount of sunlight, you know, that's been calculated, this, that, and the other. And so, like my garden, for instance, it doesn't get, especially this time of year, part of the garden won't get enough sunlight for rapid growth. But in the spring, things grow really fast, you know, and I think it's a combination of like temperature, rains. Everybody goes out and works their gardens up real good and mends the beds real good in the spring, but in the fall, I don't know the numbers, but I would imagine that a lot of people, including myself, are not the best at staying up with amending beds and getting them prepared as we would for spring, because we're looking forward to winter. We're tired. We're done. So I think all of this kind of factors in.
You also have to fold in that there's less growing around you. So in the early part of spring, your trees aren't as full.
Yeah.
Right. You know, in your individual garden, you may have less things growing. There's less things that have some height on them. Think about some of the things we even grow during the summer and how tall some of those plants that would be surrounding whatever this new planting is. You know, that's my whole thing, right? Like the amount of times I've shaded out something and didn't realize it until the point where I'm noting the failure, right? You know, and it's like, well, of course it didn't work, you know? So all of those things I think matter. And I think you mentioned this idea of how nutrient dense is the soil at that point, you know?
Yeah.
Or not.
So so for example, like I just mended one of my beds, but man, it's been used since through winter, spring, and summer. It's not up to par, but it's the best that I can do. So it's going to struggle a little bit. And I know that going into it. I like the way you make it sound like you're the only one that's ever shaded out something in your garden. And there's like so many people listening that are just like, I'm doing that right now. You know, and I mean, hell, I'm doing it as well. My corn is a lot taller than I thought it would be. My popcorn is. So all of these things kind of factor together. And it's interesting when you start putting it in. And then I do think that they factor in the germination time into the growing time to the harvest, but there's all kinds of things that can happen in the middle. So I think they also do a direct sow, whereas most people for some of these things are putting them in seed starts and then moving them over. So you have to think through that hardening off process. You set it back, then you transplant it. You're giving it transplant shock. That'll set it back. Might not be much. But look, we're talking days here. I mean, we're measuring in days at this point. You know, some people are wanting to, and it sounds like Sarah wants to, is it going to be 100 days? Is it going to be 105 days? You know, that's not a lot of time. So every little thing that we do will set that plant back to an extent. You get a little bit of drought, sets it back. You get a pest, it sets it back. You know, I don't know. Something else will set it back. Weeds will set it back.
I have a couple of squash plants. I have a bunch of things in containers, but a couple of squash plants, one single plant in each container. And every day I'm watering the containers. These plants are huge. These plants are as big as most squash, zucchini get planted in ground or in a raised bed. And I look at how it wilts every day. If I don't give it water, and still wilts a little bit. Again, this is in the middle of the summer. If I do, and there's a level of that plant like kind of repairing itself every day, right? You know,
every day.
And there is an impact on it now moving its energy to produce another set of flowers, you know, to continue their fruit. Like it's probably the workhorse of the garden right now.
Yeah. And it's one of those things that we don't realize what sets it back. So when they give us those numbers, I don't think they're having to contend with a lot of that stuff. And a lot of times too, they're putting in, I don't know, 100 plants, and then they're averaging out those. I mean, that's how you would do it. You know, you would take an average, so you wouldn't put out, you wouldn't just grow one plant and say, well, it took 63 days. There we go. It's done. So we have to keep that in mind too. And that gives us, so if we think about it that way, that'll give us a range to some extent. And I'm sure you could get on the Google machine and figure it out, and we could get down to the nitty gritty. But that's my assumption on how they come up with the days to harvest on the seed packets. Do you think that I'm off, or? That
sounds logical, right? But I've been starting brassicas for 5 years now. And every time I come up with a reason why they die, it seems logical in that moment. And then I adjust, and then they die again. So I say that to say, if someone definitively told me that was the truth, I'd be like, yep, young Ben was right. I am still moving in my garden with the assumption of I'm erring on the side of caution. Caution being, I'm going to count the 70 days as a part of this thing germinated. Right? Because it doesn't harm me so much. There's some moments where you may get crops in sooner than you really wanted to, but most times you're fighting against getting them later than you wanted to. Right? So. Yeah.
And for me, it's, what I typically do is I look at it, and let's just call it even say 100 days. And I say, okay, it's going to be 120 days. I'll add 20% onto that number. And that typically is right. But I can't, and as much as I would, trust me, as much as I would love to be able to put a seed in the ground and say, in 120 days, it will be done. And then in 15 days after that, I'll plant the next thing, and then it will be done in, 60 days. I would love more than any. Do you know how easy that would make my life? But I don't have that. And you just got to go by hope and prayer. So I use it And the more that I've gardened, I've gotten more and more used to how long plants take to grow and what to expect out of them. Like lettuce, for example, I'll grow that and I'll know, especially in the spring, like I know when it will bolt. So I can kind of go from there. I also know like when my tomatoes are going to die. Mm-hmm. So, you start to figure all that stuff out. But once you start doing that, that number means less and less. But I also think it's a little bit of a memorization thing. You know what I mean? Like I think I've memorized that like carrots are supposed to be 90 days, and I've never, ever even come close to that. 100, 130 days, just depends.
I wish for carrots. So if we take this through as the example, I sowed carrots later than, I wanted to. Welcome. My name is Batavia. This is what I do. So I'm looking May 13th. I direct sowed the carrots. I don't have notes here on when they germinated. I'm sure I could find them. But I'm at, let's see, days between dates. I'm right at like 70 some odd days. And this variety is said to be ready to harvest anywhere between like 68 and 75 days. Right. I wish I was checking the tops of them. I wish I would have pulled the carrot to see. But you know what else I can bet? I can bet that those carrots within the bed are not the same size. Good example of, I've harvested some sweet corn recently, which knocked me over with a feather, man. I couldn't be happier. And I harvested the sweet corn. Day 1, 1 ear was ready. Day 2, 1 ear was ready. Day 3, 3 ears were ready. And I still have corn that's of varying sizes. It was all sown in the same day. Generally speaking, it probably all germinated in the same day. Now, why would one be ready to harvest and the other isn't?
Yeah. And you know what? We've even totally missed the ball on some of this stuff. And it comes down to, pollination. Mm-hmm. Pollination is a big part of this too. Mm-hmm. And so
for these crops that require that. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. For crops that require it. So you've got to think about that and all this. So, as far as like our experiences with this, I have not found many things to be accurate. I agree with what Batavia said about radishes. I can see that being mostly accurate because that is a very quick growing crop. Now, are you getting the biggest size radish you can get in 30 days? Or if you went 40 days, could you get a bigger radish? Mm-hmm. Because, let's face it. I'm not trying to harvest a radish the size of my thumbnail and be like, I got to harvest, everybody. I'm trying to get something a little bit bigger.
Yeah, but I also think that radishes, I'm glad you brought that back around. Check the variety. What size is the recommendation for harvesting? Mm-hmm. Right? Because there's a point of, if it's supposed to be the size of a silver dollar and I'm waiting for it to get bigger, it may not be as tasty.
Right.
So that's radishes. I do want to go back, as when you brought back radishes, I thought to myself, it really doesn't have a whole lot of work to do. The leaves pop up, then it creates this little bulb in most cases for the varieties we've been talking about, over the course of these months. There's some varieties like daikon radish that gets a lot larger, right? But it has so little work to do if you think about like the early globe radish. That's the one that's in our shop. And not a lot of work to do, but think about something like corn. Think about the motions it has to go through. Yep. Something like cabbage. Think about what tomato plants have to go through when it comes to from that point of seeding to the point of harvesting. The more work that plant has to do, I think the more opportunities there are for time to adjust up or down.
Yeah.
At the various stages of its growth.
No, I agree with that. And I've always said, for instance, like I've got mango peppers growing this year. So many peppers, I stopped picking them. Mm-hmm. I don't even, because I don't know what to do with them, so I just stop. I don't even care. Just do what you got to do. Live your best life, because I can't live my life with 500,000 peppers coming off a vine. But a bell pepper gives you like 6 to 12 peppers. Mm-hmm. What? But they're so much bigger. The plant has to work so much harder to make them. And so we start thinking like ground cherries, which I call husk tomatoes. So many husk tomatoes come off of them. It's unbelievable. But then you grow some varieties of tomatoes and you get just a handful at a time. Now, and when I say a handful for a tomato, I mean, you're getting 2-3 tomatoes, but these ground cherries, I get hundreds of them nonstop. So I think you're exactly right. And I think where the difficulty for this, as we speak, I'm thinking about this, the difficulty for the seed packets is when you have like a carrot or a cabbage where you're only harvesting one thing off of it. Because you got to hit the nail on the head in order for everybody to be happy. But you do a tomato plant where you're going to get over and over harvest. That's a lot easier to get and to stomach too. Because what is a tomato plant? Do you have a packet in your hand that says it on there?
No, but mostly like 90 days. 90
days for the first tomato. And then you're getting tomatoes for another 30 days at minimum. You know what I mean? So it's like, okay, yeah, I'll wait 90 days for that. But then you put a cabbage in the ground. You're like, okay, 120 days. I got my one cabbage. Yay.
But you know what a good example is when you came back to tomatoes or any of these that you're starting from seed, indoors or outdoors in some type of container, and then you're going to transplant in. So the number of days that it gets to the point where you're ready to transplant, the amount of time that it lingers wherever it's sitting, right? Like one could argue you get a few true leaves, something could be transplanted into the garden space and be just fine, right? Under the right conditions, it'll continue to grow. I think about my tomato plants, which went in, I think Memorial Day weekend, so it's like the 27th or something. My tomato plants went in, but I started those like in March or something. So they sat on my back porch. There was a month that they were on the. I feel I'm a little bit embarrassed as I say that out loud. I hope I'm wrong. I hope it was less than a month. But it was like a month that they sat on my back porch. And again, let's pretend that the growing conditions were ideal for that. Are you telling me that the total number of days is the same, even though it sat in that pot about the same size on my back porch? No.
Well, why did it stay that size?
Because it didn't have the conditions, the nutrients that it needed to get to that next stage. Right. Shame on you, Batavia.
Well, and so, I mean, but see, that's an important thing to think about too, is as you go and you're growing a plant and you're potting it up and you're moving it, the idea is not to let it get root bound because that's going to slow it down. The plant will automatically stop and then I take that back. It will start to flower and fruit because it's like, hey, we're going to die. Let me get these genetics out there. And I keep saying that over and over because it's true. It's all about preserving the genetics of each individual plant. So, I'm thinking now, I had some peppers this year that I did not put, I left in the pot and they flowered a month and fruited a month before the ones I planted outside. So there you go. You know what I mean? So maybe there's something to that, but in general, root bound is an issue. And a lot of times it's really hard when you're starting seeds to catch it, to plant it at the right time. And with experience, you start to get more and more of it. I like to pull my plants out and I'll start like my tomatoes. I'll up pot them before the roots wrap around the seed cell. So what I like to do is I like to pull it up and not see roots, long roots all wrapped around. I like to see them just kind of poking through the soil and then I'll repot. And that's usually how I do it. And that will help step it up to the next level.
Yeah, I think, and sorry about the back and forth on this, but late breaking news. Sowed on 5/13th. This is a carrot variety. Emerged on 5/20 is my note, so that's 7 days. And now I'm 79 days later. Now, to complete this episode, I'm going to do this alone. That would be me going out, pulling a carrot, because we're past the point of the days to maturity based on this particular variety. Now the question is it 9 inches long and 1.5 inches wide? Because that's about what I should be getting out of this particular variety. right? So all of those things come in. Something like a cabbage, generally speaking, that's a little bit different. Like it's supposed to get to a particular size, right? When you talk about something like a broccoli head, like they're telling you about the size. A carrot, you know that I could have pulled the carrots 2 weeks ago. What size it would be, don't know, but it would have been a carrot, you know?
Yeah.
So, excuse me, all of those things matter. I don't want to use green beans as an example, especially because we're coming out of that growing season. I'm just thinking about other vegetables, any of your leafy greens, like that you can harvest as an individual leaf. Days to harvest, you get to decide when this thing is harvestable, if you will.
Right. And I think that's an important part of it too. And the other thing is, it's just like you said with the radishes, are we harvesting at the right time? Mm-hmm. You know, are we harvesting at the optimal time? The collards, are the leaves at the right time? Are we trying to get bigger leaves and the plant will actually produce? So that's all part of it as well. So the question becomes, can you speed this process up? That's the question. What do you think?
The process from seed to harvest.
Yeah.
I think I'm gathering my thoughts as as the monitor replays the question, because they're saying, "Is she not answered it yet? Is she okay up there?" The teleprompter comes up again with the question. I'm going to go with something that I know you're not going to be crazy about as an answer. I think depends. Yes, you can, if you plant in the absolute optimal conditions for where you're gardening at. The most non-answer answer that there is. But that feeds directly back into what you believe to be the truth around the days include from seeding to harvest, right? So sure, you're not going to have like the test garden, like the test kitchen. You're not going to have the test garden in your growing space. But I'm talking about, all right, it's recommended 8 weeks before your average last frost date. Plant this out. You're planting it out. You have a well-amended bed. You don't have any obstructions, like all of those things. I think that you can speed it up. I think that you can fertilize these plants and speed things up. So yeah, that's my answer. 2-part.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. I think timing. I think overall care. Mm-hmm. I was just out there looking at my corn, but I got weeds growing in between the corn and stuff. That's going to slow it down.
Yeah.
It's going to steal the nutrients. It's going to steal the water. And I know that. Mm-hmm. The question is, did I go and weed the bed? No, I didn't. I need to, but that's part of it. So it's like continuous care. And I've always heard this, about some people, we'll see, I'll go to somebody's house and and not even a vegetable garden, let's just say a flower bed is just immaculate. There's a lady up the road from me. Every single day she is weeding, watering, and taking care of her garden. Every single day, all day, she's doing that.
Y'all didn't know that I moved down the street from Young Ben.
Yeah.
That's me. I'm her. But for my flower garden, not necessarily for my vegetable garden.
But she'll do it for all of it, and it's amazing. But it's so much constant labor that she's doing. And I look at it and I'm just like, it's beautiful. I love what she's doing. I love her passion. I don't have it in me to do that to that extent. You know what I mean? Like I can't be out there 8-9 hours a day weeding consistently. And that's where herbicides and stuff came in, because all that stuff, which a lot of us don't use. I've never put an herbicide in my garden for sure. But my neighbor, for instance, he's I don't know how old he is. He's gotta be almost, if he's not in his 80s, he's real close to it. He goes out there and he is on his hands and knees pulling clovers or some kind of weed out of his grass. Like he'll be laying in his yard, picking that stuff out. It looks amazing.
Yeah.
But that's the effort that he's putting into it. So the question becomes like, are we putting the right amount of effort into this process, And I think the answer to that is you put the effort you want to put into it, but just know that it's going to slow it down.
Yeah.
And I completely think that fertilizing will speed it. I know it will speed it because I did it this year.
Yeah. I think you get what you put in, and sometimes you don't get what you put in, right? But you're not going to get much more than what you put in. I need to send my neighbor a text. This is the neighbor that's on the other side of the cage, baby, because we've had this conversation a couple of times each year. The weeds that grow up between her fence and the cage baby. So her fence is just about as tall as the cage baby. They're starting to flower.
Mm-hmm.
So the text I need to send her is, hey, can I come over to your yard and pull some weeds? Oh, they look like dandelions, but they're not quite, and they grow like 5 feet tall. But flowering is the first stage, and that's fine. But guess what ends up happening? The weeds I'm pulling right now are from last year when those weeds flowered that dropped in my bed, right? So there is this element of, are you working for a future you? And your future garden space. So there is that piece of it. I do want the listeners to know that through this episode, I have narrowed down the variety of cabbage that I'm growing, primarily tied to the thing I want to grow, but also the days from seed to harvest. And I'm going with 1 to 2 cabbage that are going to be harvestable in 60 to 75 days. I know, like the cable company. Versus varieties that were more like 87 days and then up to 100 days.
Right.
So back to Sarah's question.
What is the variety?
Amico. It's a hybrid. It's
How dare you grow a hybrid?
Is that Ugh. You're not growing that, are you?
No, I'm actually because of the debacle with the shade house, I'm growing our flat Dutch cabbage season we have in our seed shop, which is available to you if you check the link below.
Actually I didn't. Can you believe? Because I don't have it in I have it in my section of the seeds that we ship out. I didn't check the days to harvest for that. Stand by, there may be a correction.
Yeah. I don't know what the days to harvest is on it. I have to check on that too. I don't really care. I'm going to plant them either way.
Remember, this is because I'm in Chicago, Illinois, and my average first frost is November the 1st. But most importantly, it gets cold and stays cold after that, right? So that's the factor. That's the element that I'm factoring in when it comes to, by the time you hear this, which will be pretty close to when we recorded it, I have like weeks and weeks and weeks until that. I have way more than, 60 days, way more than 75 days left. But 1, I haven't seeded these. 2, I really needed to be like harvestable by that time.
Yeah. Leonard just sent it over to me too, just so you know.
Say it again.
Leonard just sent the days of harvest over to me. It's 100 days. Why
would he send it to me?
Because I'm better than you. I don't know.
Well, this is Leonard's opinion, so we know how accurate that is.
He sent me a link, and it says 100 days, but it's known to be able to be storage for months in a root cellar. So that's the draw
huge,
to it.
Though.
It is huge.
That's a part of, and it's unrelated to Sarah's question, kinda. But what are you going to do with this once you get it, right? Which is a whole different episode. But I love to talk about that kind of stuff too.
Well, apparently my family can eat the hell out of cabbage, so I ain't worried about the storage date overly. But, if I grew a bumper crop, it would be nice. So, I
have, just to clarify and save some face, I have about 3 heads of cabbage. And for me, it's just me, so I don't need a dozen heads of cabbage, and I want to grow some other things. I have 3 heads of cabbage that are going to take me into the fall. They've been slowly growing, and they're your traditional size cabbage. And so that's the reason why I worked out well that a Napa style cabbage. And I want to try to make my own kimchi. I'm nervous about it, but I want to try it. And so that all lines up when it comes to the cabbage that I'm going to give a whirl this season.
Yeah. I've never successfully grown a Napa cabbage.
Yeah. I'm going to be hopeful. Me either, though. I'm sorry. That's the proper answer.
Yeah. So before we move on to the question of the day, we're going to do 2 today. The episode and then another question. I do need to tell you about our video sponsor, or not our video, our podcast sponsor. My bad, Bleed Over.
Hint? Oh,
yeah.
Is that?
No, the Planter app. Somebody asked us why we advertise the Planter app for as long as we have, and it's because we genuinely believe in it and the ability it has to help you in your garden. We don't want to advertise anything we don't believe in. And this is a product that we use over and over in our spaces for planning, learning, combative and companion planting, which is always like a big source of contention in a garden. So it's very visual, and it just makes it easier to see instead of like reading and memorizing. I don't know about you, Batavia, but when you see it over and over, do you tend to memorize it better than if you had to like read it over and over?
I do. And I'll let you finish with this, but I want to comment related to that and Sarah's question. Okay.
So, it's on the Apple and Google Play stores. We have a link below that will get you a discount on the lifetime membership. It's a very good discount, too. So check that out. Use it to plan your gardens. Refer back. I know, for instance, I'm having issues with where things were planted this year. So I'm really going to be paying attention to my previous year's plan. So when I make my next plan, I'm not doubling up and I can really make things change. And for instance, like I just removed a trellis out of my garden. So I've got to go back into my master file and remove that trellis off of it completely. So I won't accidentally plant it again. So check out the Planter app. That's the Planter app. And get it in the Google and Apple Play Store. Use the link below. And you can use it on your phone, tablet, or even on your PC, which is a big, big plus. You want to get down and dirty? Put it on your PC screen and go to town.
One of the biggest struggles I face in my garden, outside of like just the labor of it all, is planning and sticking to the plan. And then, to be quite frank, I'm a little bit embarrassed to say it, but it's spacing of crops, right?
I wouldn't be embarrassed. I think that's natural.
I am now battling 5 tomato plants. Remember, my neighbor's landscaper told me I should have 3 there. And I'm like, gosh, I knew he was right when he said it, and I'm sitting here now like, it would be so much easier.
But your initial thought was, I'm the host of the Backyard Gardens podcast. You don't tell me.
Damn straight. I'll go through the trouble of managing 5. And now I'm like, it's so much trouble to manage 5. Really quickly, before we get to the question of the day, really, really quickly, I pride myself in not remembering all of this stuff.
Yeah.
So some things I will naturally over time, the more I work with it, remember. Other things I won't, and that's just fine.
Yeah. But as time goes on, you remember more and more faster because a lot of it becomes repetitive.
Let's hope so.
Yeah. I've seen you memorize stuff faster. Some stuff. Okay. So this one, again, is from our super secret, not so secret email account, bygquestion@gmail.com. And I hope I'm saying your name right, but Yana.
Hey, Yana.
There we go. Oh, never mind. Catherine. I'm confused.
No.
Email's one, name is stated in the bottom. Excuse me.
No. So there's no person that's Yana?
The email was Yana, but it says my name is Catherine. So, Catherine.
Okay. Well, hey, Catherine. I was okay with giving 2 heys,
Yeah, hey. So he goes, my name is Catherine, and I'm growing in Tampa, Florida. My question is regarding fertilizing for sweet potatoes. I'm growing slips bought from a big box store in a very large container, and the vines have been doing so great, but I'm starting to notice some yellowing of older leaves. I'm guessing it needs fertilizer, but because sweet potatoes are a root crop, I'm worried about just feeding the vines and directing energy away from the roots. I've only had small sweet potato harvests in the past, and I'm hoping to maximize my harvest this year. Do you have any suggestions on timing and type and balance of fertilizer for this container bed? I've been a long-time listener of the show. Thank you very much, Catherine, and love what you guys are doing. Thank you for creating this community. You are more than welcome. We're happy to be here.
Hey, Catherine. Thanks for the reminder. I actually need to get out and fertilize my sweet potato patch.
Do you?
Yeah. I literally was counting the number of days that since I planted them.
How do you fertilize yours? Like, what's your schedule?
So I don't necessarily have a schedule defined because remember, I'm still getting on the boat of, dang it, I need to do it. So I planted them oh geez, I'm about 6 weeks in. Yeah, about 6 weeks into their growth. They look great. I'd want to fertilize them somewhere between 6 and 8 weeks, because I went in with the pre-planting fertilizer. Let's just say that. They started off with compost, but also a granular fertilizer. So that has been feeding them for the last 6 weeks. I'm going to come in because I have it available, and the vines are still easy for me to get around. And I'm going to dig in the soil, some additional granular fertilizer and water well. If I had a water soluble fertilizer, this would be really good, because you don't have to worry about getting that close to the root. And we're past the point of something like, fish and seaweed, fertilizer being a thing, because that's something that you can get all over the leaves and not worry about it. So honestly, I don't know that I've even fertilized after my initial planting in previous years, but I wanted to make an effort to do that this year. And I probably won't fertilize again. I probably should fertilize maybe just at the beginning of September again.
When are you planning to harvest them?
At the end of October. Okay.
Yeah, so I do a pre-planting fertilizer as you do. I plant, and then I dig my trench. I put in well-balanced fertilizer. I may, in the initial planting, put in a little extra nitrogen, because generally, especially if you, let me take that back. If I order sweet potato slips, which I haven't done in a couple years, then that's what I'll do. I'll put in some nitrogen because they're usually kind of beat up. I grew my own sweet potato slips, and they, there was no shipping time or anything like that, or roots really removed. So I didn't add anything, but I do put the well balanced in, and then I come back, and as soon as I see that the vines are starting to take over, and you know how it'll start to be hard to see the bed, I'll put in another fertilizing, and then like this year, I think I may have given it the fish fertilizer once, and I just keep an eye on the plant. And if I don't see anything, I don't give it anymore. It's one of those crops that doesn't need a whole lot. So, and I've had pretty good luck with doing that. Saves on the fertilizer bill as well. One thing I do is I don't water them that much either. Watering them a lot will make them, I'm trying to think of the word. No, not split. It'll make them dry when you cook them, instead of that creamy texture that we all want. So this year, what I've done, for instance, is the water's off in the bed. I haven't watered them in like 3 weeks, and they're exploding in growth. Like I was just out there, and I was like, wow, these sweet potatoes are really starting to take off finally. So it's kind of working. If you think about it, I probably fertilized them. What month is this? This is August. I probably fertilized them about 6 weeks ago, so the fertilizer's probably about done, and I'm probably going to be harvesting them in about a month. So I'm not really worried about putting anything else in the ground. So I would just, and if you're getting some yellow leaves, shoot it a little bit of fish fertilizer. Don't go heavy on the nitrogen. I wouldn't do that, but that fish fertilizer is pretty light, and it could give it just enough to boost it. But you don't want to grow more vines than you do roots, so that's part of it.
Did Catherine say she was growing in a container?
She says a container bed. In a very large container. Okay.
Because, we always face the challenge of if it's, it could even be like 100-gallon container. Something like that, you're probably generally fine, but it's not the same as growing in an in-ground bed. And so you may need to increase the fertilizer. So if I were just growing sweet potatoes and didn't have the worries of anything else, can really get on top of things, I would go initial pre-planting fertilizing again at 6 weeks, and then again at 12-ish weeks, and then I would stop and wait until I'm ready to harvest. But again, and there's no hard and fast rule for me for that. That just seems logical. A couple of weeks for that fertilizer, well-balanced granular fertilizer to work itself in. It feeds for another handful of weeks, and then now I'm starting it over again. That's the logic I use.
Yeah, and I've been over the years, past 5 years, I've been growing sweet potatoes. No, 7 years, I've really been growing sweet potatoes. I've kind of tweaked it a little bit, and This year, depending on the harvest and then the texture of the potato, will really tell me if I was right.
Yeah.
The amount of vines that I have, I know I'm going to have some potatoes. There's no question.
It's wild. And for containers, I do more like probably 4 to 5 weeks in the best version of myself as a gardener.
Yeah.
I came across a video. I'm just going to say that I came across a video, and I remember my very first containers that I was growing sweet potatoes in, never grown them before. And I remember thinking all along, like, these leaves look pretty wimpy. I remember seeing all kinds of things about how sweet potato vines take over. And the amount of leaves it produced was indicative of the number of sweet potatoes and the size of sweet potatoes that I got. I've not had that poor of a harvest since then. And I've grown in containers since then as well for sweet potatoes. But I think probably the combination of, in the next year's compost was heavier, right? So better kind of soil makeup. And then in more recent years, I've started to amend my soil, at least at the beginning. At this point, I feel confident and say you're guaranteed to get some fertilizer at the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that's goes back to the episode where we were saying, like, you're going to amend. Generally speaking, we amend much better in the spring than we do in the late summer, preparing for the fall season. So it's just natural. But yeah, I mean, that's really how you do it. Just don't go heavy on the nitrogen, but you still want to give it some nitrogen, and then just let it go. And don't water too much. I mean, we had 5 weeks of no rain, and it was 97 degrees roughly for a week, and I watered it once in those 5 weeks. So maybe twice, and that was it. And everything else was getting, 2 to 3 times a week watering. But then when the rain comes, clearly it soaks it up. But I think it must have done right, because I go back out there and the water's still off, and they're just taking over. So and I had a deer eat all the leaves off of them at one point too, which is another thing, is don't cut the leaves, don't trim the vines, and you'll get more potatoes. That's how that works.
Sweet potato leaves are edible, right?
So everybody, thank you for listening to the Backyard Gardens podcast and joining us. If you'd like to support us, definitely get yourself some seeds, become a subscriber. Come see us on YouTube. I'm at Sandy Bottom Homestead, and Batavia's at Be Better Gardens. And other than that, have a beautiful day. And remember, we're always going to learn to grow and grow for change.
See ya.
Now you know why people feel like celebrating at harvest time.
All over the world, people have feasting and good times when the crops have been gathered in.
Well, we hope you enjoyed the show, and thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to support the show, you can do so by checking out our seed shop below. We have all kinds of seeds available for you, and we're going to be adding new seeds shortly, so check that out. Get yourself some seeds. It's free shipping, over $35 orders. So go ahead, get a full garden. What are you waiting for? Order your seeds and stock up. Or you can become a subscriber. You can either be an Apple subscriber or a patron, and that will help support the show. You'll get one free episode every month, an extra episode, that is. So we definitely would love to see you over there and become part of our crew. Join the Backyard Gardens community garden in Facebook. That's free. Go ahead, join that, and join the community where all the listeners get together and they can help each other out with their trials and tribulations and just show off their gardens. There's not a better way to do it. And if you're curious about what's going on in our gardens, you can check out our individual YouTube channels. So I'm at Sandy Bottom Homestead, and Batavia's at Be Better Garden. You can check that out and see how each of us are growing and what we talk about on those, because a lot of times we will coincide with the podcast and help add information in that maybe we didn't get out in the show, or we feel that's pertinent at a certain time of year. So check that out and enjoy seeing our gardens and what we do in them. And we have an Amazon store which has all the products that we use and recommend in our gardens, and it helps support our show. And we also add to this list periodically, so be sure to check it out periodically to see if there's anything that you need for your garden. Everything that you do, including a like and a subscribe and even a review, will help us learn to grow and grow for change.
See ya.